Hex Gaming has celebrated some pretty incredible anniversaries this year, such as the 30th anniversary of Super Mario Bros. And the 20th of PlayStation.
Yeah, those are some pretty big birthdays, but there is another name in the history of tech and gaming that celebrated its 30th this year, one that's slightly less celebrated.
Back in the 80s, no home computer manufacturer stood taller than Commodore. Released in 1982, the Commodore 64 was accessible, it was affordable, and to this day remains the highest selling home computer of all time. But it was the Commodore 64's successor that was far more influential. In terms of graphics, audio, and raw potential, this was a quantum leap. This machine would change the face of gaming. This is the story of the Amiga. The Amiga 1000 shipped back in 1985, exactly 30 years ago. And while it only shipped with 256K of RAM, it possessed with it a suite of dazzling new features.
A slick graphical user interface, a preemptive multitasking operating system. Previously, a home computer could only do one thing at a time. Now you could have several windows open at once. The Amiga supported 4-channel sound and graphics capable of displaying up to 4,096 colours at the same time.
I am your total home video and music studio. I am sight and sound.
The secret to this incredible power? A custom chipset.
Working hand in hand with the Motorola 68000 CPU was a video processor, Denise, an audio processor, Paula, and Agnes, the Blitter chip that controlled access to the RAM. With these powers combined, the Amiga was more than the sum of its parts.
Keep in mind, this was a good decade before graphics accelerator cards became popular in Windows PCs.
One of the strongest examples of the Amiga's early potential was Cinemaware's Defender of the Crown, released in 1986. This sprawling medieval adventure full of siegecraft and swordplay shone brightest on the Amiga as competing systems struggled to look and even sound half as good. From then on, more and more games would utilise the Amiga's power to champion their games. Titles like Cannon Fodder, Shadow of the Beast, Frontier Elite 2, and Sensible World of Soccer.
The age of the simple arcade port and text adventure was over. The multimedia era had begun.
Long before today's culture of indie game designer celebrities, the Amiga fostered a host of auteurs. The Bitmap brothers, Sensible Software, Mike Singleton, Peter Molyneux, and Jeff Minter. In '87, Commodore released 2 new models at either end of the price spectrum. The cheaper Amiga 500, which eventually outsold its competitor, the Atari ST, and the high-performance and very pricey Amiga 2000, which focused on video production and is responsible for pioneering early 90s video graphics that have not aged well. Both included a whopping 1 megabyte of RAM that, while laughable today, allowed for developers to create new and exciting forms of software that would go on to make waves throughout digital history.
The Amiga fostered the dawn of the shareware movement, a precursor, some might say, to the crowdfunding of today.
But not only were the games the Amiga made possible sights to behold, the system itself was Promethean. Anything you could witness on the Amiga, you could create for yourself. The Amiga brought forth previously inconceivable worlds of vivid colour. Yet it had a darker side too. There was the terrifying new threat of computer viruses, and a digital underground of shady cabals, hackers, and crackers. In the 80s, a bitter arms race was fought between the games publishers and the pirates, and the pirates won. Every new form of copy protection was thwarted, sometimes within days of a game's launch, sometimes within hours. The crackers would distribute their ill-gotten wares on bulletin boards by floppy disk. They would code elaborate intros to their bootlegs. Through bouncing text and synth samples, they fired off shoutouts and flames.
This ignited another arms race, as the cracker groups attempted to outclass each other, pushing the Amiga's hardware beyond its limits.
Some of these intros outshone the games they were attached to, and before long they jettisoned the need for games entirely. The demo scene was born.
More than just a fad, this was the birth of a multimedia art form, the most 80s art form imaginable.
The Amiga was so far ahead of its competition, it was as though it existed in a parallel universe. At the very same time that America was gripped with the Nintendo Entertainment System, there was some serious love down under for the humble home computer system.
I don't know. What's it called?
Commodore Amiga. Brilliant stuff from under $1,000.
Excellent.
As the 90s rolled around, and at the height of their popularity, Commodore released the Amiga 3000, a new system with a new iteration of enhanced chipset. And while it faced a slew of criticism in comparison to the successful PC and Mac models of the time, it still contributed to Commodore selling 1 million units in a year, 1/3 of their total sales up until that point. However, over time, the Amiga's abilities were becoming less and less unique. All the things that once made it special had now become ubiquitous. New models came fast and cheap. The Amiga 500 Plus was produced as a cheaper version of the 500 and marketed as a game-focused machine, but was heavily criticised as it was unable to run many popular titles of the time. Development of the Amiga 600 and eventually 1200 still couldn't keep up with the success of IBM, who now dominated the market.
Get smart. Get an IBM PC.
So why did the Amiga die? Well, put simply, in 1994, Commodore went out of business.
The previous Christmas period had been a disaster for Commodore. Sales figures had plummeted, and a failure to stock shelves or even produce a competitive machine that year had led to a total profit loss of $357 million. By May 94, Commodore was forced to file for bankruptcy and subsequently ceased all production on new machines. The once thriving tech company was abandoned. It was the end of an era.
Yes, the Amiga is dead, but its spirit lives on.
A lot of teenage rebels of the Amiga underground ended up hitting the big time. The Swedish demo group The Silence went legit and formed the studio Digital Illusions, better known as DICE. And the shady Finnish scenesters of Future Crew went on to form Remedy Entertainment. So, when looking back at the history of video games, it's a little too easy to dismiss tech now as outdated as the Amiga, but the influence of the format and its pioneers cannot be understated.
Above all, the Amiga was ahead of its time. 30 years ago, it gave us a glimpse into the future, and now, after all these years, it seems the future has finally caught up.